wonderful learners. How are you doing today? I trust you are all doing well. You are welcome to Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. My name is Emmanuel, and I'll be teaching you history. Today, we will be looking at legitimate trade in Nigeria. Legitimate trade in Nigeria. At the end of today's class, students will 1. Describe legitimate trade. 2. Students will identify the articles in legitimate trade. 3. Students will explain the reasons for the establishment of the legitimate trade. 4. Students will examine the effects of the introduction of the legitimate trade in Nigeria, and we'll also look at the problems associated with the legitimate trade. What is legitimate trade? Legitimate trade refers to the commerce in goods and resources that was promoted as an alternative to transatlantic slave trade. When transatlantic slave trade was abolished, a particular trade replaced the slave trade. It served as an alternative to the slave trade, and that was the legitimate trade. It was the trade where African raw materials, especially cash crops, were exchanged for European goods. Some commodities like palm produce, rubber, cotton, leather skin, cocoa, and others. This was because these products were of high demand in Europe as a result of high industrial revolution. You may recall that one of the reasons for the abolition of transatlantic slave trade was as a result of industrial revolution in Europe. So when they have industries being put in place, they needed some products in order to be used for finished goods. Articles of the legitimate trade. Palm oil. Palm oil was, in fact, the key and major article of the legitimate trade. It was used in the production of soap, lubricants, and even candles. It was produced in areas like the Yoruba land. Even in Benin Kingdom, we have it there. In Boni, in Calabar, they are all there. 2. Palm kernel. This was another article of the legitimate trade that was highly needed and demanded by the Europeans. Granules. Granite was used for the production of cooking, oil, and soap. Granite was produced in the northern part of the country. 4. We have other commodities like rubber, like cotton, like leather skin, cocoa, and others. All these commodities are the articles of the legitimate trade. Moving forward, what are the reasons for the establishment of legitimate trade? The main reason was to serve as a replacement for transatlantic slave trade, which is to completely replace the slave trade. 2, to obtain cheap raw materials in Nigeria. Yes, all these things are being exchanged very cheap from Nigeria. Also, expanding European colonial influence. As at that time, Europe, they thought of it that yes, slave trade has been abolished, but also they don't just want to leave. In order to expand the colonial influence in Africa and Nigeria, that was part of the reason why Europe also introduced legitimate trade, in order for them to remain in the region which is known as the present-day Nigeria. 4, a means of undermining the continued illegal slave trade. Yes, the legitimate trade served as an alternative in order to put an end, to completely stop, in order to tackle the continued participation of the slave trade, because when it was officially abolished, still some set of people who still engaged in it. So legitimate trade served as what? A means to undermine and tackle the continuous participation of slave trade. 5, economic diversification of Europe and continued economic engagement with Nigeria. Yes, the Europeans, they know that Nigeria is well blessed with lots of resources. So they don't just want to lose the region Nigeria in order for them to even diversify their economy through the resources of Nigeria, which is what part of the reasons that happened. That was why there was economic exploitation. So this was one of the reasons for the establishment of legitimate trade in Nigeria. The effects. What are the effects of the establishment? Number 1, cultural exchange and influence. Although the legitimate trade has to do with the importation of European products as well, which changed the life of Africans in terms of our culture, our dressing, some of the food we eat, even the kind of house we build. So the legitimate trade actually changed some of our culture. That has to do with exchange of culture as well. Also, introduction of uniform means of exchange, such as cowrie shells. Later, it changed to coins, then later it's changed to British pounds and pence. Also, introduction of financial institutions, such as banks, insurance companies, and the likes. Establishment of wages and salaries is part of the effect as well. Price control was also part of the effect. Introduction to weigh and measure system, such as gallons for liters and yards for meters. Also, another effect is that the legitimate trade actually changed the means of exchange known as trade by barter. Before the legitimate trade, it was trade by barter. You give me and I give you another, you give me something and I give you another thing in exchange of the same value. So they changed that means to the introduction of uniform means of exchange that eventually led to currency. Also, problems. There are some problems that were involved during the establishment of legitimate, it doesn't just come very easy. There were some restrictions, there were some problems attached to the legitimate trade. Number one, there was opposition from European countries such as Portugal and France, whose economy still depended on the slave trade, because their plantations at that time, the Industrial Revolution has now gone wide in countries like France. So they still depended on it. So there were restrictions, oppositions from them. So in some African societies, slaves were accepted by culture and custom. Yes. In fact, it is even worthy to note that the slave trade even existed before the Europeans came. There are some societies that saw it as their customs, whereby when they wage war against another kingdom, they enslave the occupants of those kingdoms. Also, social problems in Europe were even worse than that of Africa as at that time. Also, diverse culture, religion, beliefs, and norms between African and European slavers. Introduction of returning slave colonies in Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Liberia. Yes, when it was actually abolished, when transatlantic slave trade was abolished, it did not only stop. All the slaves were directed to be returned back to their country. Then there was mass production of cash crops than food crops. It was a problem because the Europeans majored on cash crops. What will be exported to their country and be used for finished goods are those things they concentrated on. So food crops that was meant to be consumed by Nigerians reduced, and major targets were being put on cash crops like palm oil, cotton, and the likes. Yes. Our practice question: after everything you have learned in legitimate trade, in your own word, what can you say about legitimate trade? I've explained to you that it was a trade that replaced, that served as alternative to the transatlantic slave trade after it was abolished. So, what is your perspective and your view about the legitimate trade? I would like to know. And I want you to put your view and perspective in the comment section on all our social media handles displayed on the screen. See you there. Thank you for watching. If you also have any feedback or suggestion or observation, please feel free to say that in our social media platform. Thank you once again for watching us.